Have you ever had one of those weeks where you just feel like there is a giant, inescapable target painted directly on your back?
Oh, absolutely. The kind of week where the universe just seems to,
Zero in on you.
yeah.
Like
Uh,
it abandoned its general indifference to the world and just decided to hit you specifically with a relentless sequence of absolute disaster.
right. It's a deeply universal human experience. It's that chilling pivot where hardship stops feeling like, a random distribution of statistics
Hmm.
and starts feeling incredibly intentionally personal.
Exactly. I mean, you wake up late because your alarm didn't go off. You rush out the door and your car battery is completely dead.
Oh, the worst.
Right. And then you finally get to work, you're sweating and stressed, only to find out you were passed over for the promotion you've been grinding toward for 2 years.
Ugh.
And you find yourself just standing there in the middle of a Tuesday looking up at the ceiling thinking, what exactly did I do to deserve this?
We have all stood in that exact spot.
We really have. But today, the mission of this deep dive is to completely deconstruct that specific feeling. We're tearing down the anatomy of adversity.
And to do this, we are unpacking a really intense convergence of material today.
We are. On one side, we're looking at a hard-hitting psychological breakdown of human self-sabotage, like the literal observable mechanics of why certain people seem perpetually haunted by bad luck.
Right, and to counterbalance and really deepen that psychological perspective, we're pulling from some profound theological explorations. Specifically, we're examining how ancient Islamic tradition, alongside the timeless behavioral observations found in biblical proverbs, frames the concepts of human suffering, structural hardship, and the architecture of divine tests.
It's a fascinating stack of sources.
It is, and I think it's crucial to lay down a foundational parameter right here at the beginning, because we are walking directly into the intersection of heavy psychology, philosophy, and ancient theology. The goal here is not to litigate faith.
Yeah.
Regardless of what you believe, whether you are deeply religious, fiercely agnostic, or anywhere in between, we are just looking at these texts for their structural frameworks. We aren't here to tell you what to believe or take sides on matters of faith.
Right. Our goal is to extract the wisdom, map out how these ancient traditions have categorized the human experience for millennia, and, give you powerful, functional new lenses to view the friction in your own life. That is the exact mission. By the end of this deep dive, you are going to stop viewing the friction, the delays, and the pain points in your life as mere cosmic bullying. You're getting a masterclass in extreme personal accountability, paired with an ancient blueprint for deep spiritual resilience.
Which is a tall order, but the material delivers.
It really does. So let's unpack this. We have to start at the absolute surface level, the everyday, mundane annoyances. The psychological framework we're examining kicks off with a very blunt reality check.
A very necessary one.
Yeah, it says the world is not a fairy tale, and it was never designed to be perfectly accommodating.
Right. It's a disruption to a very modern cognitive distortion. I mean, we often walk around with this unspoken, deeply ingrained assumption that the baseline of the universe is fairness.
Like it owes us something.
Exactly. Like reality should naturally curve to accommodate our personal happiness. But the baseline of the physical world is imperfection and entropy.
Yeah.
There is disease. There are volatile tectonic plates. There are fundamentally selfish actors operating in your immediate vicinity. So when a torrential downpour ruins an outdoor event you spent 6 months planning, the universe isn't rendering a judgment on your character.
Right. It's a meteorological event.
It is just weather.
Which is actually incredibly liberating, if you think about it. We suffer from this intense main character syndrome where we assume the atmospheric pressure dropped just despite our weekend plan.
Oh, absolutely. We personalize everything.
We do, but the literature quickly pivots from the things we absolutely cannot control, like atmospheric pressure, to the things we absolutely can control, but actively pretend we can't.
Ah, yes. The territory of toxic choices.
Toxic choices. And it starts by diagnosing a widespread behavioral mechanism called consequence blindness.
Consequence blindness is, well, it's the engine that drives the illusion of bad luck. Human beings are incredibly susceptible to temporal detachment.
Temporal detachment, break that down for us.
Sure. We make a decision, and because the negative outcome doesn't manifest 5 seconds later, our brains completely detach the cause from the effect.
Wow. So we just uncouple the two events completely.
Right. The psychological analysis provides some scenarios that are almost uncomfortable to read because they're so common. Like you find yourself crippled by financial anxiety at the end of the month, completely bewildered by your situation, but
But you willingly lent a significant amount of money to someone you historically knew was unreliable.
exactly.
Or the classic academic disaster, staring at a failing grade in total shock, conveniently editing out the fact that you actively chose to prioritize entertainment over studying for the preceding 3 weeks?
Right. You're shocked by an outcome you directly engineered.
Exactly. Or escalating to life-altering stakes, getting a DUI, and cursing the profound unluckiness of a police checkpoint.
When the reality is a deliberate, active choice was made to consume alcohol and operate heavy machinery.
Right. The gap, the temporal space between the action and the fallout, is exactly where the myth of bad luck breeds. It actually makes me think of this structural concept. Let's call it consequence debt.
Consequence debt, I like that.
Yeah, it operates identically to compound financial interest.
The mechanics of compound interest apply to human behavior. Let's explore the architecture of that.
So think about the fundamental nature of debt.
Yeah.
You want an immediate reward, so you leverage your future. You buy something today, you get the dopamine hit of the acquisition, but the structural cost is delayed.
And if you don't reconcile that cost, it accrues interest.
Exactly. It multiplies in the bark. The material we're looking at uses a grim but mathematically perfect example. If a person adopts a destructive habit, like smoking cigarettes in their teenage years, and then receives a devastating lung cancer diagnosis at age 60, that diagnosis is not a sudden, random lightning strike of terrible luck out of a clear blue sky. That is the grim, unavoidable collection of a 45-year consequence debt.
The bill finally came due.
The bill came due. The interest compounded daily for 4 decades.
Consequence debt is a highly functional way to visualize this because it forces accountability into the timeline. And what accelerates the accumulation of that debt is a behavioral pattern described as playing a blind game.
A blind game.
Right. It leans on the foundational adage that failing to plan is functionally identical to planning to fail. We frequently stumble into easily avoidable disasters simply because we actively refuse to run the preliminary diagnostics on our own lives.
It's the refusal to look at the map.
Exactly.
Like, you have a career-defining meeting across town, you don't check the route, you don't account for rush hour traffic, you don't verify the parking situation, you inevitably hit gridlock, you get lost, you arrive 20 minutes late, and the opportunity dissolves.
And the immediate psychological defense mechanism is to exclaim, "My luck is completely cursed today."
Right. But the reality is, the traffic wasn't the variable. The variable was your preparation. You opted into a blind game, and the house always wins a blind game.
Which transitions seamlessly into the next psychological trap, the loop of insanity. The clinical repetition of failure.
Oh, this one is brutal.
It is. We all know the classic definition of insanity, right? Doing the exact same thing repeatedly while genuinely expecting a divergent outcome. But the deeper question is why?
Yeah, why do highly intelligent people cling to comfortable routines even when those routines possess a 100% failure rate?
Right. Why do we refuse to extract data from past errors, choosing instead to stand in the wreckage and wonder why history keeps targeting us?
That is the core frustration. If we touch the hot stove and get burned, we generally don't touch it again.
Yeah.
But with complex behavioral patterns, we keep putting our hands right back on the burner. Why is that?
Because behavioral change is cognitively expensive. Changing a habit requires an immense amount of executive function, conscious effort, and deep emotional discomfort. It forces a confrontation with the ego.
It's exhausting.
It really is. It's psychologically cheaper in the immediate short term to repeat a familiar destructive habit and offshore the blame to a conceptual universe than it is to stand in front of a mirror and say, "I am the sole architect of my current misery, and the demolition and reconstruction of my life requires grueling, unglamorous work."
Wow. Victimhood, ironically, is a very comfortable recliner.
That is perfectly stated.
That hits incredibly hard. So that establishes the internal landscape, our personal choices, our cognitive blindness, our refusal to plan. But the analysis doesn't stop at the border of our own minds. It moves outward to our environment.
Right.
How do the external variables, specifically the people we allow into our proximity, invite disaster into our lives? And this is where the modern psychological analysis finds incredible synergy with ancient wisdom.
It really does.
Yeah.
The texts pull directly from the book of Proverbs to
Yeah.
dissect the mechanics of social contagion. It's an ancient observation of network effects.
Yeah.
It cites Proverbs 13.20. "Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm." And then it layers this with Proverbs 12.26, contrasting the navigational guidance of the righteous with the disorienting paths of the wicked.
And Proverbs 16.29, right? Which specifically notes how chaotic or violent individuals actively entice their neighbors into destructive environments.
Exactly. It's the ancient poetic articulation of the modern self-help axiom. You are the exact average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Which we've all heard a million times, but it goes deeper than that.
It goes much deeper than just absorbing their general vibe. It's about the splash zone of their consequence debt.
Oh, the splash zone. Explain that.
Well, if you consistently surround yourself with people who make reckless financial decisions, who operate with chronic negativity, or who actively engage in deceitful behavior, their delayed consequences are going to detonate. And if you are in their inner circle, you are in the blast radius. If you voluntarily get into the passenger seat with a legally intoxicated driver, you are going to participate in the physical reality of the car crash, regardless of whether your hands were on the steering wheel.
Wow. So auditing your social circle is not about being elitist. It is a fundamental requirement of self-preservation.
Exactly.
And a massive component of that self-preservation is the ability to recognize red flags.
Yeah.
Not just in the people we ride with, but the blindingly obvious red flags we plant in our own front yards and then pretend not to see.
Right, the internal sabotage.
Yeah, the psychological material highlights this bizarre phenomenon of knowing our own fatal weaknesses, yet willingly walking into environments designed to exploit them.
The financial example they gave was brutal.
The financial example was so resonant. It's like, you know you possess a severe lack of impulse control regarding spending. You are actively trying to dig yourself out of consumer debt. Yet, the exact afternoon your direct deposit clears, you decide to just go window shopping at the exact stores that trigger your spending.
And then you return home, surrounded by shopping bags, experiencing a wave of shame and bewildered frustration.
Acting as if the credit card literally swiped itself.
Right. It is the deliberate dismantling of your own defensive perimeter. You are walking directly into the line of fire of an acknowledged vulnerability and relying on real-time willpower to save you.
Which never works.
No, because behavioral science tells us that willpower is an incredibly finite and easily depleted resource.
Absolutely. But I want to introduce some friction here regarding boundaries, because the text emphasizes the catastrophic inability to say no. It frames this as a primary saboteur. But that assumes the requests being made of us are always frivolous or purely extractive. What about the complex gray areas of deep obligation?
That's a really important distinction to make.
Right, because it isn't always a selfish desire to go to a casino or a mall. Often it's taking on an extra project because your specific department is drowning and you care about your colleagues. Or it's continuously bailing out a family member who is constantly in crisis, and ignoring them feels like a severe moral failure. In those moments, saying yes to our own detriment feels like the objectively righteous thing to do.
That is the most difficult terrain to navigate, and it's a highly valid pushback. But the analytical framework argues that even in the context of genuine altruism, the chronic inability to say no ultimately mutates into a saboteur.
How so?
Well, operating without boundaries under the guise of nobility inevitably leads to structural burnout. When you refuse to establish load-bearing walls in your life, you allow everyone, even well-meaning people, to continuously add weight to your foundation.
And eventually cracks.
Eventually, you take on a critical mass of obligations, you exhaust your physical and emotional reserves, you begin dropping catastrophic balls, your health deteriorates, and your relationships fracture under the resentment.
That makes total sense. You look at the resulting wreckage and categorize it as a streak of terrible luck.
But it is actually the predictable mathematical collapse of a structure built without limits.
Yeah.
Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They are the structural supports that allow you to continue standing.
Wow. So even altruism requires structural integrity. That clarifies it immensely. And the material pivots to a much darker, higher stakes example of what happens when those preliminary boundaries are absent, specifically regarding deep moral temptation.
Yes, it looks at the anatomy of catastrophic personal failures, like marital infidelity.
Right. It uses the scenario of a professional traveling for work. You are aware of your own loneliness, the anonymity of a hotel bar, the availability of temptation. If you do not establish rigid, non-negotiable boundaries before you ever pack your suitcase, you are actively greasing the slope.
The core thesis here is that a massive moral collapse, like a divorce-inducing affair, does not just happen in a vacuum.
It is never a spontaneous event.
Never. It is a highly sequential, step-by-step process. It is a long chain of micro-permissions. It starts with a lingering conversation, crosses the professional line, then it's a private text message, then it's a solitary drink.
It's a series of small, seemingly manageable boundary violations that cumulatively erode your inhibitions until a catastrophic collapse is the only remaining logical step.
The argument is one of extreme preemptive accountability. If you had acknowledged the vulnerability and constructed the boundary at step 1, the devastation at step 10 would have been physically impossible to reach.
It demands that you treat your own psychology as a known hazard.
Precisely.
And the absolute antithesis of this proactive accountability is the final saboteur we need to discuss in this section, the victim mindset.
The victim mindset is uniquely destructive because it functions as an autonomous, self-fulfilling prophecy. The psychological literature is very clear on this.
How does it fuel itself?
Well, when adverse events occur, and the baseline of reality guarantees that they will internalize, internalizing that adversity and deciding that you are inherently cursed triggers a massive behavioral shift.
Okay.
If you genuinely believe that nothing you do matters and the universe is actively working against you, your brain rationalizes that effort as pointless. You drop your guard, you stop scanning for opportunities, you make increasingly reckless, low-quality decisions because the outcome is, quote, already decided.
And the inevitable result of reckless, low-quality decisions, more adversity. You have effectively transmitted a broadcast signal inviting further disaster into your life.
It is a self-perpetuating downward spiral.
Ah.
And locked arm in arm with that victim mindset is the corrosive nature of unreleased anger.
The metaphor they use for this is incredible.
It really is. The texts utilize a highly evocative, timeless metaphor to explain the mechanics of resentment. Holding on to deep anger towards someone who has wronged you is the exact equivalent of picking up a glowing, burning hot piece of coal with your bare hand, with the sole intention of eventually throwing it at your enemy.
But while you are waiting for the perfect moment to throw it, you are the one holding it. You are the one incinerating your own flesh.
It completely reframes the concept of forgiveness. In this operational framework, forgiveness is not a pardon. It is not an absolution of the perpetrator's guilt, nor does it require reconciliation.
Right.
Forgiveness is simply the cognitive decision to drop the burning coal. It is a self-preservation tactic to ensure that a trauma inflicted upon you in the past does not possess the ongoing authority to dictate your future decisions and burn down your present reality.
Drop the coal. I love that. There is also a crucial bonus point highlighted in this section that acts as the final nail in the coffin of self-sabotage ego. Specifically, the egoic refusal to accept external guidance.
Yes, the willful isolation of the mind. Whether that guidance originates from experienced mentors, wise peers, or stepping into the theological realm, divine instruction ignoring it out of sheer pride is catastrophic.
Because you think you know better.
Exactly. When you reject good advice simply because you didn't originate the idea, or because it challenges your current behavior, you are actively severing the exact lifelines that could instantly alter your trajectory. You are choosing to stumble blindly through a minefield because your ego is too fragile to let someone else hold the map.
Okay, so we have laid down a very heavy, unyielding foundation of extreme personal accountability. We have dissected the mechanics of consequence debt, the slow poison of toxic social circles, the structural collapse caused by a lack of boundaries, and the self-immolation of the victim mindset.
We have.
But the literature we are analyzing operates with intense intellectual honesty. It acknowledges a massive, undeniable caveat. And this is the pivot point of our entire deep dive, because there are moments, events, and circumstances where the adversity you are facing is genuinely, unequivocally not your fault.
It is the most crucial pivot we can make. The psychological texts explicitly document that the human experience is frequently impacted by forces entirely outside of individual control.
Right. It lists systemic realities, the crushing weight of systemic racism, deeply entrenched discrimination, generational poverty, volatile macroeconomic collapses, and the sheer statistical danger of living in high-crime environments.
These are massive environmental and structural realities that inflict profound, unearned hardship on individuals who executed their personal choices flawlessly.
Exactly. You can have immaculate boundaries, you can eradicate your ego, you can curate a flawless social circle of brilliant mentors, you can plan every detail of your week, and you can still be utterly devastated by the fallout of a discriminatory system, a sudden terminal illness, or a drunk driver crossing the center line.
And that forces us to confront the ultimate question.
Right. When we are slammed by these genuinely uncontrollable catastrophic forces, how do we intellectually and emotionally process them? How do we survive the impact without immediately defaulting back into the exact victim mindset we just proved is so psychologically lethal?
And this is exactly where the second half of our source material, the deep dive into Islamic theology, provides a staggering philosophical framework.
Okay, let's get into this.
What is truly fascinating about this perspective is that it completely redefines the nature of the universe. It does not view random tragedy or unearned hardship as a glitch in the cosmic system.
Wait, not a glitch.
No, not a glitch. In this theological architecture, the concepts of life and death were specifically, intentionally engineered as a massive, overarching operating system designed to test the ultimate quality of human character. Adversity isn't an error message. Adversity is the operating system.
Let me make sure I am fully grasping the scale of this. You are saying that through this specific theological lens, the uncontrollable tragedies, the friction, the moments where you are completely powerless, they are not evidence that the universe is broken or that a divine creator is asleep at the wheel.
No.
They are, in fact, the active curriculum of a deliberate test.
Precisely. The core theological argument is that a claim of faith, or even a secular claim of possessing high moral character, is functionally meaningless in a vacuum. It's just a theoretical claim until it is subjected to immense pressure.
Right, it's easy to be a good person when everything is fine.
Exactly. The universe, therefore, is explicitly designed to apply that pressure to reveal the empirical truth of what resides inside the human heart.
Okay, if the premise is that human life is an ongoing examination, we need to know what kind of test we are taking. Because in any academic setting, the methodology of the test dictates how you prepare. A pop quiz requires a different mindset than a doctoral defense.
Very true.
The texts break down an incredibly nuanced, highly specific Arabic lexicon for the different categories and purposes of hardship, and this absolutely blew my mind. Let's dive into this lexicon of hardship.
Let's do it. The material first delineates three overarching purposes for these divine tests. The first purpose is termed kafara, which translates to the expiation or wiping away of sins.
Wiping away of sins. Okay.
The profound concept here is that earthly struggles ranging from a catastrophic illness to the minor annoyance of a delayed flight serve as a real-time spiritual detox.
A spiritual detox.
Yeah. They are mechanisms that clear your ledger. By enduring the hardship in the physical world, the corresponding spiritual debt is erased, preventing you from having to face the ultimate consequences in the hereafter.
So, shifting the perspective, that flat tire on the way to work isn't the universe mocking you. It might literally be the universe clearing a massive negative balance off your spiritual tab.
Exactly. It reframes the annoyance into an act of unseen mercy. The second purpose is rafa'at ad-darajat, which signifies the active elevation of one's spiritual status.
Elevation, like moving up a level.
Right. These are specific trials designed not as punitive measures for past mistakes, but as extreme resistance training for the soul. It is the application of heavy weight to force spiritual muscle growth, pushing an individual to a rank they could never achieve through comfort alone.
Wow. And the third purpose?
The third is the crucible of authenticity, separating the true believers from the hypocrites. The text references Quranic verses explicitly stating that humans should not operate under the delusion that they will be left untested simply because they verbally claim to have faith.
Because talk is cheap.
Talk is very cheap. When the pressure of severe hardship is applied, the facade fractures. The test forces the internal reality to the surface.
So those are the structural purposes. But the literature goes further, categorizing the exact types of tests using three distinct terms, bala, ibtila, and fitna. When I was reading the definitions of these mechanisms, my brain immediately mapped them onto the structure of complex video game.
Oh, I love that. That is an incredibly modern way to process ancient theology. Walk me through the mechanics of that analogy.
Okay, think about the architecture of game design. The text describes ibtila as a targeted purification process that usually occurs as a direct response to a misstep or a sin.
Right.
In the language of gaming, ibtila is the penalty box. You broke a specific rule, you violated the boundary of the game so your character takes a debuff, or you lose health points. You have to sit in the friction, wait out the timer, and you re-enter the game purified, ideally having learned the mechanics well enough not to make the same mistake.
That maps perfectly to the concept of responsive corrective hardship.
Then we escalate to bala. The text defines bala as a massive, overwhelming hardship specifically meant to elevate your status. And it traditionally ends in immense glory if navigated correctly.
Yeah.
In a video game, bala is the ultimate grueling boss fight. It is intentionally designed to be almost impossibly hard. It will deplete all your resources, you will likely fail multiple times, and you will want to rage quit the game.
It's meant to push you to the limit.
Exactly. But the game designers built it that way because when you finally defeat that boss, the reward is massive. You get an unparalleled level up, you unlock entirely new areas of the map, and you earn the rarest loot.
The difficulty of the Vala is directly proportional to the magnitude of the elevation. That is a highly accurate parallel. Which brings us to the third category, fitna. Because the theological texts highlight fitna as unequivocally the most complex, deceptive, and lethal test of the human soul.
It's deceptive.
Very. It is the test that intentionally blurs the boundary between a blessing and a curse.
Right. And in the gaming analogy, fitna isn't a boss fight. Fitna is the cheat code.
Ah, the cheat code.
It is the unauthorized mod you download that grants your character infinite gold, unbreakable armor, and god-tier power. In the first 10 minutes, it feels euphoric. You are destroying enemies effortlessly. You have everything you could ever want.
But then what happens?
Slowly, inevitably, the cheat code completely corrupts your psychology. Because there is no longer any challenge, the game loses all meaning. You stop caring about the narrative, you skip the dialogue, you lose the discipline of strategy, and eventually, the very abundance of the cheat code ruins the entire experience. You abandon the game because having everything made the game worthless.
That is a brilliant translation of the concept,
Huh.
and it perfectly aligns with the most profound insight in the theological source. Fitna almost always arrives heavily disguised as extreme abundance.
Right. Disguise.
It manifests as sudden, massive wealth, unchecked political power, overwhelming physical beauty, or unbroken professional success. And that exact disguise makes it infinitely more dangerous to the soul than the crushing weight of poverty or the agony of physical disease.
But logically, why is that? I mean, why is winning a multi-million-dollar lottery mathematically a harder spiritual test than receiving a devastating medical diagnosis?
Because the environment of the test dictates your awareness. When you are severely ill or facing eviction or enduring deep grief, you are acutely, painfully aware that you are inside a trial. Your vulnerability is impossible to ignore.
You know you need help.
Exactly. In that state, you naturally turn to a higher power. You ask for assistance, your ego is shattered, and you remain humble. You are awake to the reality of the test.
Yeah.
But when you possess immense wealth, perfect health, and unchallenged authority, the illusion of self-sufficiency takes over.
Yeah.
You do not realize you are in an exam room. You look around at your abundance and you conclude, I have won, I earned this, I am the master of my reality.
The ego inflates completely.
Arrogance calcifies the heart. You forget your fundamental dependence on anything greater than yourself, and you fail the test, precisely because the comfort of the fitna puts you to sleep.
That is a terrifying psychological reality. To realize that the exact markers of success we spend our entire lives violently competing for might actually be the most lethal traps we ever face.
It reorients your entire worldview.
It really does. So, to move these concepts out of the theoretical realm, the texts offer a series of epic historical and theological case studies. They examine the ultimate archetypes of adversity, the masterclasses of the prophets.
Right.
How did the apex figures of faith navigate the mechanics of Bala, Ibtila, and Fitna?
And the analysis begins at the absolute origin point of the human narrative. The archetypal confrontation between Adam and Iblis, the entity known as Satan.
And it highlights a nuance in that story that completely shifts the paradigm. Because we are traditionally taught that the first test in the Garden of Eden was a simple binary test of obedience, don't eat the apple. But the text frames it entirely differently. It wasn't a test of dietary restriction, it was a fitna, a highly sophisticated fitna of ambition.
Exactly. The theological breakdown notes that Iblis didn't approach Adam and simply argue that the forbidden fruit was delicious. He executed a psychological manipulation based on inherent human desire. He tempted Adam with the ultimate fitna, absolute power and immortality.
Wow.
He whispered, "Your Lord only forbade you this tree, lest you become angels or immortals." It was a test pitting the intoxicating ambition for godlike status against the humble submission to divine limits.
Both entities, Adam and Iblis, catastrophically fail their initial tests in this theological narrative. But the literature zeroing in on the aftermath is where the true masterclass resides. It highlights the vast, unbridgeable chasm between the anatomy of their failures.
Yes, the divergence is critical. Iblis's failure was rooted in pure, unadulterated arrogance. When commanded to bow to Adam, he analyzed his own composition fire and deemed it inherently superior to clay. He believed in his own supremacy.
He thought he was better.
Right. But more importantly, when the divine creator confronted him about his disobedience, Iblis refused to repent. He doubled down on his ego, essentially arguing that God was wrong for giving the command.
And Adam.
Adam, conversely, did not sin out of arrogance. He sinned out of inherent human weakness, forgetfulness, and the seduction of ambition. But the absolute second he recognized the magnitude of his error, his ego shattered. He immediately owned the failure and sought repentance.
So the operational takeaway for us is profound. The framework is stating unequivocally that making a mistake, even a catastrophic one, is not the ultimate failure.
No, the system expects you to fail.
The true fatal failure is the egoic refusal to return from the mistake. Adam's trajectory is established as the baseline template for human success. You will inevitably break the rules, but your ultimate redemption is entirely dependent on your ability to bypass your ego and execute a course correction.
Moving chronologically, the source transitions from the internal psychological failure of Adam to an entirely different spectrum of endurance. It examines the staggering narrative of Nuh, or Noah.
Let's talk about the ultimate psychological marathon.
Unbelievable.
The text emphasizes that according to the tradition, Nuh engaged in active public preaching to his society for 950 years. He was met with almost total unbroken rejection.
Almost a millennium.
Right. To put that in perspective, in our modern dopamine-driven reality, we experience deep psychological distress if a text message is left unread for 24 hours. Nuh absorbed the violent mockery and social exile of an entire civilization for nearly a millennium. It is the absolute apex of patience.
The sheer duration is staggering, but the analysis makes a sharp pivot that elevates the emotional stakes of the story. The ultimate bala, the crushing weight of the test, was not the external mockery of the public square. Nuh could endure the rejection of strangers. His true crucible was the rejection originating from inside his own home.
This is where the narrative becomes incredibly agonizing. Nuh's own wife and his own son actively rejected his message. And the text describes the apocalyptic climax of the flood. Nuh is on the ark, the water is rising, and there's this excruciating, intensely human moment where a desperate father calls out over the waves to his drowning son, begging him to climb aboard and believe. And the son looks at his father and refuses, choosing to climb a mountain instead, which ultimately fails to save him.
And the theological architecture established in that moment of absolute devastation is a hard, unyielding rule.
What's the rule?
The framework dictates that the bond of shared faith and ultimate truth supersedes the biological bond of blood. Nuh was forced to choose his submission to God's reality over the agonizing, primal, biological instinct to save his child, who rejected that reality.
That is heavy.
It is. The text classifies this not as a punishment, but as a devastating bala, a trial of unimaginable emotional pain designed to elevate his spiritual rank to the highest possible echelon.
It is a devastating emotional metric. And speaking of tests that target the deepest biological and emotional bonds, the deep dive moves directly to the story of Ibrahim, or Abraham. The texts frame his entire existence as a masterclass in escalating systematic detachment.
Detachment is the perfect word for it. Ibrahim's narrative is a progression of severing ties with everything a human being naturally relies upon for identity and security. First, he is forced to logically dismantle the idolatry of his society, which results in him being thrown into a fire, a literal bala.
Right.
Then he is forced into exile, severing his connection to his homeland and his father, who actively threatened to stone him. But the detachments escalate. He is commanded to take his beloved wife and his newborn, desperately awaited son, Ismail, and leave them alone in a desolate, barren valley in the desert.
Unimaginable.
And finally, the narrative reaches its terrifying zenith, the command to sacrifice that very son.
I think we have to pause and really interrogate this moment. Because to a modern listener, operating with modern sensibilities, this command sounds objectively horrific. It sounds like the hallmark of a cruel, capricious deity. Why would a loving God demand that a father slaughter his own child?
It is the most challenging question in the theological landscape, and the texts address it by forcing us to look at the underlying architecture of the test rather than just the physical action. The literature is very clear. The goal was never the physical death of Ismail.
It wasn't about the act itself.
Exactly. The divine intent was never blood. The entire architecture of the test was designed to definitively prove what entity occupied the throne of Ibrahim's heart.
The throne of the heart. That is a stunning conceptualization.
It is the ultimate hierarchy of love and submission. After a lifetime of struggle, Ibrahim finally had a son in his old age. The natural human tendency is for that child to become the center of the universe, to occupy the ultimate throne of devotion. The command to sacrifice was the ultimate diagnostic test. Was his supreme attachment, his ultimate loyalty, tethered to the biological miracle of his son, or to the Creator who gave him the son? It was a test to measure the purity of his absolute submission.
And he passes it.
He does. And the narrative resolves when both Ibrahim and Ismail willingly submit to the command, proving in real time that God held the ultimate supremacy in their hearts. The moment that internal reality was proven, the physical sacrifice was immediately intercepted and replaced.
Wow.
The text argues that this was not an act of divine cruelty, but the ultimate necessary crucible required to unlock the absolute highest spiritual status a human can achieve, Khalilullah, the intimate friend of God.
When you reframe it as a diagnostic test of the heart's ultimate hierarchy, rather than a demand for blood, it changes the entire geometry of the narrative. It's terrifying, but conceptually profound. Okay, we need to keep moving through these historical masterclasses. The next archetype analyzed is Yusuf, or Joseph. And the source material explicitly notes that his narrative is referred to as Asanal Qasas, which translates to the best of stories.
And it earns that title because it is a comprehensive, encyclopedic compilation of human adversity. Yusuf's life touches every single note of suffering.
He went through everything.
He really did. He experiences the profound trauma of familial betrayal when his own brothers throw him into a dark well and sell him into slavery. He experiences the intense fitna of youth, extreme physical beauty, and proximity to power when he is relentlessly seduced by the wife of a powerful Egyptian minister.
Right.
He successfully resists the fitna, but as a direct result, he is subjected to the crushing weight of institutional injustice. He is falsely accused, slandered, and thrown into a brutal dungeon where he languishes for years.
He literally hit every possible branch on the way down the adversity tree. Betrayal, slavery, false accusation, imprisonment. But the literature highlights a massive structural twist in his narrative.
Yes. If we pull the thread from our earlier discussion about the lethal nature of fitna, the analysis proposes a radical idea. Yusuf's greatest, most dangerous test was not surviving the well. It was not enduring the dark isolation of the prison.
His greatest test was surviving his promotion. His greatest test was becoming the most powerful political figure in the Egyptian empire.
Precisely. The sudden acquisition of absolute, unchecked power.
This concept completely inverted my understanding of hardship. We are so deeply conditioned to believe that pain, poverty, and isolation are the true tests of character. But the text argues that absolute power is the ultimate truth serum. When you are powerless, chained to a wall in a dungeon, of course you turn to God. Of course you are humble. Of course you spend your nights in prayer. You have absolutely no other leverage in the universe. Your humility is essentially mandatory.
But the dynamic shifts entirely when you are elevated to the throne. The narrative climax occurs when a severe famine strikes the region, and the very brothers who violently betrayed Yusuf, who threw him into a hole and left him for dead, are now standing in his throne room.
The ultimate setup for revenge.
They're starving. They are desperate, and they do not recognize him. Yusuf now possesses the ultimate power of life and death over his abusers. He has the absolute authority to execute a flawless, historically justified revenge. The society around him, the laws of the empire, and basic human instinct would all validate his vengeance.
And what does he do with that terrifying amount of leverage? He chooses supernatural restraint. He looks at the men who destroyed his youth and he says, "There is no blame on you today." He passes the ultimate fitna of absolute power by voluntarily relinquishing the ego's primal desire for retribution. He had the power to crush them, and he chose to forgive them. It is the absolute zenith of moral character.
It truly is. And from the intoxicating heights of political power, the theological analysis drops us into the agonizing depths of physical vulnerability with the story of Ayub, or Job.
A completely different kind of trial.
Ayub's narrative is the systematic stripping away of every earthly comfort. He loses a vast agricultural empire and staggering wealth. He experiences the unimaginable grief of losing all his children. And finally, his physical body is ravaged by a severe, debilitating disease that leaves him bedridden and isolated.
But the scholars analyzing this text point out a really vital, nuanced distinction regarding how Ayub navigated this complete physical and emotional collapse. Because there is this toxic misconception in modern spirituality that being patient or demonstrating faith requires you to be a silent, stoic, emotionless robot who never sheds a tear.
That is a highly damaging distortion, and the text corrects it beautifully. It points out that Ayub did vocalize his agony. He wept. He cried out in pain. The critical theological distinction lies in the direction of his complaint.
Direction of his complaint. What do you mean?
Ayub complained to God about his immense pain, but he never at any point complained about God.
That is such a fine, razor-sharp line, but it changes everything. Complaining to God is an act of deep relationship. It is an acknowledgement of dependence. It is a child crying out to a parent saying, I am in agony, please help me.
Exactly.
Complaining about God, however, is an act of intellectual arrogance. It is putting the divine on trial and saying, you made a mistake in your calculations and you are unjust for allowing this to happen to me. The lesson here is that expressing profound grief and pain does not mean you have failed the test of patience. It simply confirms that you are a biological human being.
It is a profound validation of the human emotional experience. And this progression of archetypes finally culminates in the life of the Prophet Muhammad, whose narrative the texts describe as the ultimate synthesis of all preceding trials.
The synthesis of all of them.
His life is presented as the complete spectrum of adversity. He experienced the vulnerability of orphanhood from birth. He endured crushing poverty. He buried almost all of his children in his own lifetime. He faced relentless assassination attempts, severe economic boycotts, and violent social exile from his own tribe.
He faced the entire catalog of human suffering. But the source zeroes in on one highly specific event that I found incredibly grounding. It examines the events of the Battle of Uhud. During this intense military conflict, the Prophet was not magically shielded. He was physically struck in the face. The armor of his helmet was driven into his cheek. He lost a tooth, and he was bleeding profusely on the battlefield.
Yes, the ultimate leader, the apex figure of the faith, physically bleeding and wounded in the dirt.
So what does this specific detail communicate to us? It is a profound reality check. It proves that possessing the highest conceivable level of spiritual purity does not grant you a magical force field against the laws of physics. Gravity still works. A sharpened sword will still sever tissue.
That is a brilliant synthesis of the theology. The source is making a definitive, uncompromising statement. Faith was never designed to be a cheat code to bypass the physical realities of the universe. It does not grant you immunity from sickness, betrayal, or the sharp edges of the world.
Then what does it do?
What it provides is the internal resilience, the cognitive framework, and the ultimate overarching purpose required to endure and navigate that reality without shattering. You must operate within the laws of physics. You must, as the famous tradition says, tie your camel first, and then you place your ultimate trust in the divine.
Okay, we have spent a lot of time analyzing these massive, epic, historical archetypes. We're talking about ancient kings, prophets, oceans parting, and barren deserts. But how does this ancient architecture apply to me, sitting in bumper-to-bumper traffic on a Tuesday, or dealing with a passive-aggressive email from my boss?
Right, bring it back to the daily grind.
Exactly. The final section of our analysis takes these massive blueprints and drops them directly onto the modern battlegrounds. Where exactly do we encounter the mechanics of Bala, Ibtila, and Fitna today?
The literature categorizes the modern manifestations of these tests into three primary arenas. The first arena encompasses the family and the workplace.
Let's start with the family dynamic, because earlier we unpacked the agonizing story of Nu and his son.
Right. The text draws a direct, unbroken line from Nu's ancient struggle to the modern heartbreak of marital discord or the deep anxiety of raising rebellious children in a chaotic culture. It extracts a very tough but ultimately liberating lesson.
What is it?
You, as a parent or a partner, are only responsible for the inputs. You can provide the most loving environment, you can model excellent behavior, you can offer the best guidance, but the ultimate control over another human being's heart belongs exclusively to the divine. Your daily test is to consistently execute your duty with patience and love. The ultimate trajectory of their life is their own individual test.
Which fundamentally relieves the crushing burden of outcomes. You are graded on the effort, not the final conversion rate.
Exactly.
And then the text moves to the modern workplace. It draws a fascinating parallel between the ancient dust-filled marketplace of the prophet Shu'aib, where the primary sin was merchants intentionally rigging their scales to cheat customers to the pristine, glass-walled towers of the modern corporate world.
The external aesthetics have changed, but the fundamental fitna remains identical. Today, the rigged scale doesn't look like a tampered weight in a bazaar. It looks like sophisticated office politics. It looks like the intense pressure from a manager to creatively hide the true interest rates in a financial portfolio, or the expectation to deploy slightly unethical sales tactics just to hit a quarterly quota.
Or it can be as subtle as navigating the cultural pressure of a secular office. finding the internal courage to excuse yourself from a crucial meeting to observe your daily prayers, or choosing to maintain wearing a hijab in a corporate environment that subtly or overtly penalizes outward displays of faith.
Yes.
The text frames these not merely as annoying HR dynamics, but as daily, high-stakes micro-tests of your core integrity. The universe is asking, what is your exact price? Will you compromise the architecture of your soul for a 4% end-of-year bonus?
And that precise friction leads into the second modern battleground, which the analysis identifies as arguably the most dangerous frontier for the current generation. The university, or more broadly defined, the arena of the mind.
Yes, the text draws a sharp, critical distinction between historical temptations and modern temptations. It contrasts the temptations of base desires. The Arabic term is shahawat, which encompasses greed, lust, anger, with the sophisticated intellectual assault of ideological doubts, termed shubuhat.
Historically, human tests frequently centered around surviving physical scarcity or resisting primal biological urges. But the literature argues that the absolute greatest fitna of the modern era is purely intellectual. It is the labyrinth of academia and digital media.
Intellectual fit.
Exactly. It lists the dominant ideologies, aggressive materialism, extreme moral relativism, rigid and shifting gender ideologies, and the pervasive baseline of militant atheism. These are not physical armies. They are complex, highly weaponized ideological mazes designed to deconstruct foundational truths.
So it requires a completely different skill set. Just as Ibrahim had to utilize razor-sharp logic to outmaneuver the priests of his time and literally smash the stone idols of his society, the modern individual is required to utilize deep study, historical context, and rigorous intellect to smash the ideological idols of our current culture.
You have to engage the mind.
You do. The days of simply inheriting your parents' worldview and coasting on it are over. You are required to actively, intellectually defend your reality.
That is the exact mandate. You cannot survive an intellectual fitna with purely emotional faith. And finally, the analysis brings forward a staggering historical detail regarding the Prophet Muhammad's greatest fear for the future of his followers.
Right.
And what is most shocking is what he wasn't afraid of.
Yeah.
He wasn't afraid of them experiencing poverty. He wasn't afraid of them being militarily conquered by foreign empires.
This specific point sent a chill down my spine. His greatest, most explicitly stated fear was that the material world would be thrown wide open to them, that they would be granted extreme wealth, luxury, and abundance, and that they would completely destroy their own souls, fiercely competing with one another to accumulate it.
It is a devastatingly accurate prophecy of the modern condition. We are currently existing in an unprecedented era of staggering material abundance, technological marvels, and instant gratification.
We have everything.
Yet simultaneously, we are recording epidemic, unprecedented levels of clinical anxiety, deep depression, and hyper-consumerist burnout. We are literally cannibalizing our own peace of mind, fracturing our families, and degrading our physical environment in relentless, exhausting competition for more. It is the ultimate realization of the fitna of abundance.
It brings us right back to the video game analogy. It is the cheat code fundamentally ruining the game. We have successfully conquered the material world, we have all the gold and all the armor, and we have completely lost the plot of why we are playing in the first place.
Exactly. We failed the test of prosperity.
Okay, we have covered an absolute immense expanse of psychological and theological terrain today. We need to pull all of these threads together into a cohesive synthesis. We began by dissecting the brutal psychology of self-imposed bad luck.
The toxic choices.
Right, the toxic choices. We looked at the necessity of acknowledging those choices, the vital importance of calculating and paying down our consequence debt before it bankrupts us, and the life-saving requirement of building rigid boundaries to ensure we aren't collateral damage in someone else's blast radius.
And then we dramatically widened the aperture. We layered that psychological foundation with the epic theological lens. We explored the concept that life is not a series of random accidents, but a highly calibrated operating system of tests.
Tests with a purpose.
Exactly. We analyzed the mechanics of Bala, the crushing hardships meticulously designed to elevate your spiritual capacity, and the terrifying nature of fitna, the lethal tests that arrive draped in the deceptive camouflage of blessings and abundance.
And the most beautiful realization is that the core foundational message across both of these vastly different disciplines, modern behavioral psychology and ancient Islamic theology, is remarkably, undeniably the same. You are not a helpless, tragic victim of a cold, indifferent universe.
No, you are not.
You are not a passive target practice dummy for bad luck. You possess immense, profound agency. Whether you are taking clinical accountability for your refusal to plan, or you are deeply recognizing that a sudden, unearned tragedy is actually a divine curriculum designed to purify your soul, the conclusion remains constant. Your struggles are not random. Your friction has profound meaning.
That is the ultimate operational takeaway of this entire analysis. So we want to issue a very specific call to action. We want you to look closely at whatever's causing you the most acute frustration in your life at this exact moment. Look at that recurring bottleneck at work, that grinding friction in your marriage, that persistent financial stress.
Run the diagnosis.
Run the diagnostics we talked about today. Ask yourself honestly, is this merely a consequence debt from a comfortable bad habit I am refusing to abandon? Is this a fitna disguised as a blessing, actively testing the limits of my ego? Or is this a bala, a heavy, agonizing weight placed on the bar, specifically meant to help me level up my spiritual endurance?
Because accurately identifying the precise nature of the test is the absolute prerequisite to passing it. And to close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought. It's an extrapolation drawn from a closing theological concept in the text we analyzed, and it has the power to completely flip the script on how you process the minor, maddening annoyances of your daily life. What if the very thing that is causing you the most acute stress right now, that canceled meeting, that minor financial loss, that sudden brief illness, that incredibly frustrating roadblock that completely derailed your meticulously planned day, what if that isn't a punishment? What if it is actually the universe or the divine executing a precise spiritual detox on your behalf? What if that tiny, highly annoying earthly pain, that frustrating 20-minute delay, is quietly, invisibly operating behind the scenes to save you from a massive, catastrophic impact further down the road? What if the universe isn't painting a target on your back? Well, what if it's actually pulling you out of the line of fire? Think about it.